Weak German Shepherd is attacked by a lion. Then the unbelievable happened. "Bring the dogs here and shut up and go back to camp, or you'll die." Victor roared, his bloodshot eyes flashing with cruelty. Hannah, though trembling, stood in front of the door, her stick clenched in her hand. Freya is a warrior, not a commodity. This breathtaking confrontation was just a part of Freya's dramatic story. To not miss the next developments and support Freya's brave spirit, please click the subscribe button, like, and listen to the whole story. The growl was deep, throaty, a sound that didn't belong in the Bavarian forests on the outskirts of Munich. It vibrated through the damp ground, directly into the paws of the German Shepherd. Freya, a hot, alien smell, musky, dangerous, hit her, overpowering the familiar scent of damp earth and pine needles. Seconds before, she had been laboriously trying to nurse her newborn puppies in a sheltered spot beneath a fallen oak tree, her own stomach aching with hunger. Now, every muscle in her emaciated body was on high tension. The leaves rustled threateningly. Then, among the dense firs, a nightmare materialized, massive, ochre-colored, with a mane like a dark halo and eyes that glowed like hot coals in the gathering dusk. A lion, here, impossible. Freya's brain registered the imminent, deadly danger. A panicked whimper died in her throat as the monster took another step, lowered its head, and let out a deafening roar that shook the air. Instinctively, despite her weakness, she pushed herself in front of the soft whimpering of her pups. The pain as the lion's paw landed on her shoulder was blinding, nearly knocking her off her feet. Blood spurted. She felt muscles tearing, bones crunching, but a single thought pounded in her skull. The pups, with a cry that was more despair than aggression, she bit blindly. Hannah Weber, 65 years old, her silver hair practically tied in a bun, knew the woods surrounding her small property on the outskirts of Munich like the back of her hand. For over 40 years, she had lived here, a refuge for animals in need, a thorn in the side of anyone who considered animal cruelty a trivial offense. Her day began before sunrise with feeding the rescued chickens, tending to the 3 elderly cats who had made themselves comfortable in her kitchen, and walking Max, her loyal, arthritic Labrador. For the past few weeks, however, her routines have been overshadowed by a new worry, a stray German Shepherd she had spotted several times at the edge of the forest. The animal was excruciatingly thin, shy, and obviously in poor condition. Hannah had set up feeding stations, but the dog was too wary to approach. Hannah suspected she might be pregnant or already had puppies, which only increased her urgency to secure the animal. The area was mostly quiet and rural, despite its proximity to the big city. But for several months, there had been rumors of strange occurrences on the farm of the Hundezucht Sturm dog breeding, a remote property about 2 kilometers from Hannah's house. There were rumors of dubious characters, nighttime transports, and a constantly changing population of dogs kept in deplorable conditions. Hannah had tried to alert the authorities, but without any solid evidence, her reports went unheeded. She sensed an underlying threat emanating from this place, a coldness that had nothing to do with the weather. Her instincts told her that more was going on there than just a poorly run dog breeding operation. The idea that the emaciated German Shepherd could have come from there haunted her. Freya, as Hannah called her in her head, fit the image of the neglected animals associated with Sturm. That late afternoon, with the sun already low in the sky and long shadows casting, Hannah was on one of her rounds to check on the timid German shepherd. She had fresh food and water with her, hoping to finally gain the animal's trust. The first sound she heard was not a normal forest animal noise. It was a deep, shattering roar, followed by a high, pained yelp that made her blood run cold. Hannah's heart skipped a beat. This was not a fight between local wildlife. She recognized the yelp it was, that of a suffering dog. Despite the sudden paralyzing fear that gripped her, she forced her legs to move. She had to look. Armed only with the heavy Maglite flashlight she always carried with her, she beat her way through the undergrowth toward the sounds. When she reached a small clearing, a horrific sight met her eyes. A huge male lion creature stood over a collapsed German shepherd Freya. There was no doubt about it. The dog was covered in blood, her flank twitching weakly. The lion, its fur dull and matted in places, seemed unsure of itself, snorting and looking around as if irritated by its own boldness or the unfamiliar surroundings. Then Hannah noticed the faint, desperate squeaking coming from a cavity beneath a nearby root. Puppies! At that moment, Hannah forgot all caution. A scream, a mixture of rage and terror, tore from her throat. "Leave her alone, you beast!" She brandished the flashlight, the beam of which briefly blinded the lion. Surprised by the sudden disturbance and the loud scream, the predator backed away a few steps, growled deeply, but then turned heavily and disappeared into the dense forest with astonishing speed. Hannah didn't hesitate for a second. She rushed to Freya, her heart pounding against her ribs. The dog was barely alive. "I'll get help. Girl, hang in there," she whispered, before her gaze wandered to the nest with the 3 trembling puppies. Her first clear thought: these animals had to get out of here immediately, and someone had to be held accountable for this atrocity. The question of where a lion came from hung unspoken but urgent in the air. Hannah mustered all her strength. With trembling hands, she carefully wrapped Freya in an old blanket that she always kept in her car. The dog was frighteningly light. She gathered the 3 puppies, barely bigger than guinea pigs, into a basket. The drive to her small infirmary next to the house was a race against time. As soon as she arrived, she called Dr. Carl Richter, a veterinarian and old friend who had often made the impossible possible. Carl arrived minutes later, his expression becoming increasingly serious as he examined Freya's wounds. Deep lacerations and bite wounds. Hannah, a lot of blood loss, shock. The risk of infection is enormous. This wasn't a normal dogfight. The injuries looked like they were inflicted by a very large predatory cat. He provided Freya with emergency care, setting up IV fluids and administering antibiotics and painkillers. Her condition is catastrophic. She's emaciated to the bone. That she's even alive is nothing short of a miracle. He had little hope for the puppies. They're hypothermic and dehydrated. Without their mother, it's going to be difficult. Hannah refused to give up. She warmed the puppies, trying to feed them some lukewarm milk with a pipette. Freya lay there listlessly, but when Hannah placed the puppies near her, she weakly lifted her head and a soft whimper escaped her lips, a spark of the will to live. For the next few days, Hannah watched over Freya and her puppies day and night. The dog recovered painfully slowly, but something about her behavior was strange. Every now and then, when she regained some strength, she became restless, scratched at the door, whined softly, and stared intently at Hannah. On the third day, when Freya first felt unsteady on her feet, she practically dragged Hannah to the back door and then toward the woods, to the spot where the attack had taken place. Hannah followed her, confused and worried. Freya hobbled purposefully to a thick clump of blackberries not far from the fallen oak tree and began frantically digging and whining. Carefully, Hannah pushed the thorny vines aside, and there, in a small, well-hidden hollow, lay a fourth cub. It was even smaller than the others, cold and barely moving. It was a tiny heap of misery that Freya had obviously hidden from the lion, and perhaps from the elements, before she herself was attacked. "Oh my God, Freya," Hannah whispered, tears in her eyes. "You knew all along." This small, almost lost life was the incredible thing that fueled Freya's will to survive even more. Meanwhile, news of a lion sighting slowly spread. The local police were initially skeptical, dismissing Hannah's excited report as possible mistaken identity or exaggeration. An elderly lady, very fond of animals, perhaps a little confused, Hannah heard her say on the phone. But when a jogger also reported seeing a big cat, tentative investigations began. Hannah repeatedly mentioned the Sturm dog breeding business and the suspicious pet trade. But without any evidence, her concerns fell on deaf ears. The complications grew. A dangerous predator was on the loose. A brave dog was fighting for her life and that of her puppies, and those responsible seemed to be getting off scot-free. The story of the lion and the injured German shepherd finally reached the ears of Greta Schilling, a young, ambitious local journalist known for her investigative reporting. Greta had already been investigating the Hundezucht Sturm dog breeding network for some time due to repeated indications of violations of animal protection laws and rumors of illegal puppy transports. Hannah's story added a new, alarming dimension to the whole thing. A meeting was arranged. Hannah, initially reserved, quickly gained trust in the dedicated journalist. She told her everything about Freya's condition, the puppies, the fourth, hidden cub, the lion attack, and her suspicions about the Sturm dog breeding facility. Greta listened attentively, took notes, and asked precise questions. She had already heard of unusual animal deliveries at Sturm crates that were definitely not intended for dogs. If Sturm is indeed illegally keeping or trading exotic animals, and this lion escaped from there, Greta began, then we're dealing with organized crime here, Ms. Weber. This is far more than just a lost animal. This moment was the turning point. For Hannah, it was confirmation of her worst fears, but also a glimmer of hope that someone was finally taking her concerns seriously. For Greta, it was the key to a potentially explosive story. Together, they decided to dig deeper. Greta used her contacts to discreetly investigate veterinary offices and customs authorities for any evidence of illegal imports of big cats or other exotic animals related to Sturm or its known operators. Hannah tried to reconstruct every last detail about the activities surrounding the Sturm farm from her memory. The realization that Freya's fate was not just a tragic, isolated incident, but a symptom of a much larger, unscrupulous business, gave Hannah new strength. Freya was not just a victim, She was evidence, a reason not to give up. Saving Freya and her puppies was no longer just a labor of love, but became a mission that could have far-reaching consequences. From now on, they worked as a team, aware that they were treading on dangerous ground. There was no turning back. The lion had to be captured, and Sturm's machinations exposed for Freya's sake and for the sake of all the other animals who might still be suffering. The revelations and the collaboration with Greta had shaken Hannah. Her initial reaction was a mixture of fear and determination. The idea that the owners of Hundezucht Sturm were not only torturing dogs, but possibly also trafficking dangerous wild animals was terrifying. Hannah worried about her own safety and that of the animals in her care, but the thought of Freya and the torment she had endured strengthened her will. Greta suggested a systematic approach. We need evidence. Hannah, photos, videos, witness statements, anything that will force the authorities to act. They began observing the Sturm farm from a safe distance, using a telephoto lens. Greta captured the first images of suspiciously small cages at the rear of the compound and of delivery trucks coming and going at odd hours. Hannah remembered a former Sturm employee, a young man named Tobias, who had quit because he could no longer tolerate the conditions. With Greta's help, they managed to track him down. Tobias was initially intimidated, but Greta's assurance of anonymity and Hannah's vivid account of Freya's fate finally persuaded him to spill the beans. He reported dozens of neglected dogs, sick animals that received no medical care, and crucially, a separate, tightly guarded area on the farm where other, larger animals were kept, to which only the boss, Victor Sturm, and a few insiders had access. He had heard lions roar, but had never been sure. Meanwhile, Freya was slowly but surely recovering. Her wounds were healing, her coat was beginning to shine again, and she devotedly cared for her 4 puppies, whom Hannah had named Blitz, Stern, Mond, and Little Shadow. Her presence was a constant reminder and motivation for Hannah. Every small step forward by the dog and her puppies encouraged Hannah in her efforts. However, the operators of Sturm, especially the intimidating Victor Sturm himself, seemed to have smelled a rat. Once, when Hannah was laying out food for wildlife near the farm, an old habit that now served as an excuse for observing the area, a dark SUV drove past her at a menacingly slow pace. At the wheel was a man she recognized as one of Sturm's henchmen. He stared at her openly, a cold smile on his lips. It was an unmistakable warning. Hannah felt a chill, but she didn't let it intimidate her. She knew she and Greta were on the right track. The plan now became more concrete. They had to try to get closer to the farm, perhaps even take pictures of the secret area Tobias had described. The risk increased, but the need to act outweighed it. The escaped lion still hadn't been caught, and fear among the local population grew with each subsequent alleged sighting. The situation was escalating. Greta had learned through her contacts at the police that the investigation into the lion was ongoing, but threatened to come to nothing without concrete clues as to its origin. The officers were frustrated, the public nervous. Hannah and Greta knew they had to provide the crucial clue. One evening, under the pretext of looking for a lost cat, they ventured closer to the grounds of Hundezucht Sturm, equipped with a night vision camera. Greta attempted to take pictures of the ominous rear area over a poorly secured section of fence. It was a risky undertaking. Suddenly, headlights appeared. Victor Sturm and two of his men had apparently noticed them. With loud shouts and threats, they chased the two women from the property. Greta was just able to rescue the memory card from the camera before they jumped into the car and sped off. The footage was shaky, but it vaguely showed large cage structures and what looked like the outline of a large cat. It wasn't enough to warrant a raid, but it confirmed their suspicions. Victor Sturm was now alarmed. He knew that Hannah Weber and the journalist were hot on his heels. He decided to take matters into his own hands. A few nights later, as a violent thunderstorm raged over the region and the sounds of rain and thunder drowned out other noises, Victor Sturm broke into Hannah's house. He had received Freya's description from his people and suspected that the dog, a valuable breeding bitch that had escaped from him, had found shelter with Hannah. He wanted to get the dog back and silence Hannah. Hannah awoke to a splintering sound from the kitchen. Her heart raced before she could react. Sturm was standing in the bedroom hallway, a crowbar in his hand, his eyes glaring viciously in the dim light of a street lamp shining through the window. "Where's my dog, you old witch? And you better keep your mouth shut about my business." His voice was a threatening growl. Hannah, paralyzed with fear, could only think of Freya and the puppies sleeping in the next room. But before Sturm could take another step, something unexpected happened. Freya, who had also heard the noise and whose instincts were sharpened, rushed out of the room. Despite her wounds not yet fully healed and her still weakened constitution, she threw herself at Sturm's legs with incredible determination. Her deep, angry growl filled the small hallway. Surprised by the sudden attack and the pain as Freya's teeth caught his forearm, Sturm lost his balance and his crowbar. One of the puppies, Blitz, who was a bit braver, padded out from behind Freya, barking in his high-pitched voice as loudly as he could. At that moment, Hannah found her voice and her courage again. She grabbed the heavy cast-iron poker that stood next to the fireplace and struck Sturm's shoulder with all her might. He roared in pain and rage. The noise and barking alarmed the neighbors, who were already sensitized by repeated reports of the lion and the general unrest. Sirens were quickly approaching. Victor Sturm, caught between a raging dog and a determined old woman, saw his situation and attempted to escape, but was stopped by the arriving police. Freya had not only defended herself and her puppies, but had also saved Hannah, provoking Sturm's crucial mistake. The break-in during Hannah's arrest and Victor Sturm's arrest were the last straw. With the recordings secured by Greta, Tobias's testimony, and now the physical assault as solid evidence, the public prosecutor's office immediately obtained a search warrant for the entire premises of the Sturm dog breeding facility. At dawn the next day, a large police contingent arrived, accompanied by veterinarians from the department, animal rights activists, and a special team for exotic animals. Greta was also on site as a press representative. What they found on the farm exceeded even their worst fears. Dozens of dogs languished in filthy, much too small kennels, many of them sick, malnourished, and apathetic. In the rear, well-hidden part of the property, they then came across the secret area, several primitive cages in which not one, but 2 other lions and even a young tiger were kept in deplorable conditions. The escaped lion did indeed come from here. It had escaped through a poorly secured cage, presumably due to stress and hunger. Victor Sturm and his closest accomplices were arrested. It turned out that they were part of an international illegal pet trafficking ring, which procured the animals for private collectors, illegal trophy hunts, or dubious circus companies. The escaped lion was tracked down and secured that same day by a tranquilizer gun team in a nearby wooded area. It was also in poor condition, but alive. The days and weeks following the raid were turbulent. The rescued dogs and exotic animals were distributed to various animal shelters and specialized rescue centers throughout the country. The captured lion and the other big cats were taken to a renowned wildlife sanctuary where they finally received appropriate care. The legal investigation into the Sturm case began and promised to be lengthy, but those primarily responsible were in custody. Greta's series of articles about the Hundezucht Sturm case and the heroic role played by Hannah Weber and her dog Freya made national headlines. The story of the weak German shepherd who stood up to a lion to protect her cubs and thereby exposed a quagmire of crime and animal cruelty deeply touched people. Donations poured in for Hannah's Little Animal Sanctuary and other animal welfare organizations. Freya and her 4 puppies, Blitz, Stern, Mond, and Little Shadow, recovered fully under Hannah's loving care. Freya, once an emaciated, frightened creature, blossomed. Her fur became thick and glossy. Her eyes shone with alertness and intelligence. She was not only the protector of her puppies, but also Hannah's loyal companion. Hannah had a large, secure enclosure built in the garden for the little canine family. Every evening, when the puppies were tired from playing and snuggled up to their mother, Hannah sat with them, stroked Freya's head, and whispered, "You are a miracle, my brave girl. You saved not only your children, but so many others." Tears of emotion and pride often welled up in her eyes when she thought of all this extraordinary dog had gone through and accomplished. Freya, the frail German shepherd, had become a symbol of resilience, motherly love, and courage, whose story would be told long afterward in Munich and beyond. The unbelievable was not just the survival of a single puppy, but the entire chain of events triggered by a mother's will to survive, changing the lives of many for the better.